Gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. For what purpose does the gentleman from
Mr.
Alabama
Chairman,
rise?
to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, while I have every respect for the philosophy of the gentleman from Texas, and I share his views on abortion, I don't think that's what this debate or this amendment even addresses. Indeed, I feel like I have made a giant and major impact on the elimination of any funds for abortion anywhere in the world. As a matter of fact, my bill says that none of the funds of this bill may be used for an abortion, period. So this is not an abortion issue. This is a family planning issue, because some feel like that if you go into a country and through educational processes, you will eliminate the needs for abortions, and they well may be right. So don't imply to anyone in this body or anyone in this audience watching today that the bill that I wrote permits abortion in any fashion, because it absolutely restricts it. You cannot perform abortions with any of the money anywhere in this bill, period, flat, no. Now, when I took this committee over as chairman several years ago, Mr. Chairman, if I had come to you and said to you and the proponents of the right to life proponents and said, I am going to cut funding for family planning in half, then I would have been heralded as a hero. And now I have done that, only to be addressed on the floor as a proponent of abortion, which I am not. So I would submit to this Congress and to the gentleman from Texas, while I agree with his views with respect to the right to life, you're absolutely wrong in your allegation that any of this money can be used for abortion. It does not, it cannot, it will not, and never will as long as I am chairman of this committee. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would oppose the gentleman's amendment indicating to the Congress that the restriction is already there, that we have cut family planning in half over the period of time that I have used, that we have actually cut, if you use 1995 figures, $518 million from family planning activities. So I think that we've done an outstanding job, and I would urge my colleagues to vote against this amendment.
Would the gentleman yield?
Be happy to, sir.
Thank you for yielding. I do not want to imply that you have permitted or endorsed or encouraged, or the bill says directly there are funds here for abortion. I would concede that.
If the gentleman would yield to me or answer my question and just say, is there anything in this bill that leads you to believe that any of this money can be used for abortion anywhere in the world?
I'm addressing the fungibility argument.
Well, the fungibility and the tangibility of what is in this bill. Well,
this is very important.
You cannot use any of this money for abortions anywhere in the world.
Would the gentleman yield?
Well, if the gentleman would concede to that point, I'll be happy to.
That is true directly, but indirectly, the fungibility argument is very important. If you use funds for other things, you save those funds, and those governments and those agencies then can use them for abortion. So you do it indirectly. Yes, it might be a little harder to comprehend the fungibility argument, but it's there. If we support a country or a government or an agency that does permit and endorse abortion, and they can use these funds for birth control pills, they can use their other funds to do the abortion. So yes, you are correct that directly there are no funds in this bill that will provide for abortion, but indirectly it opens up some funds and makes them available for abortion.
Would the gentleman admit that we have done a very favorable job in moving in the same direction that he would like us to move? Would you not admit that since when I took over this committee it was $518 million, and now we have reduced it every year? We have reduced it to a level of $385 million. I think we have made significant inroads, and yet preserve the ability of agencies to go into a country with limited educational opportunities to give them advice. Maybe it can be through a church. Maybe it can be through abstinent programs. But I do think that education in that manner actually denies the probability of abortions even being presented. But if they were presented, none of this money could ever be used under any circumstance for an abortion anywhere in the world.
But would the gentleman yield?
I'll be glad to yield.
The efficiency of the programs are to be questioned. If you look at the Norplant program, they put this Norplant in hundreds of thousands of women. It's not a good medication. I have personal experience from it. And then they use that as an example of the reason to promote it in the United States.
The time of the gentleman from Alabama has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to strike the requisite number of words.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I would yield my time to the lady from California, Ms. Pelosi.
Thank the gentleman. Thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Chairman, I once again reiterate my opposition to the Paul Amendment and support the statement of our chairman, Mr. Callahan. As this Congress should know by now, because it's been reiterated on this floor, no money in this bill can be used for abortion. That is the Helms language. That is the law of the land. Let's be clear. So we want to take it to a fungibility place. I hope that Mr. Paul will support the Gilman, Pelosi, Campbell, Lowy, DeLauro, Slaughter, Greenwood proposal on the floor tomorrow, which addresses the fungibility issue very directly. First of all, I don't think it needs to be addressed. But for those who need that comfort and that clarification, I'm pleased to be a supporter of that amendment. And in that amendment it says that none of the funds would go to organizations that do not promote abortion as a method of family planning and that utilize these funds to prevent abortion as a method of family planning. It puts these conditions on receiving the funds. And it also says that except in the case of organizations that do not promote abortion as a method of family planning. So there's nothing about fungibility here. This is about organizations that promote family planning and discourage the use of abortion for family planning. So fungibility is not a principle that applies here. But if we're going to use the principle of fungibility, we're opening a door for many issues across the board in this bill and every other bill that comes along. I don't know that this Congress wants to go down that path. But I'm pleased to say that the amendment that will be offered tomorrow as an amendment to the Smith Amendment will clarify once and for all, this isn't about fungibility, it's about family planning, and none of the money goes to any organization unless they are promoting family planning and discouraging abortion as a tool for that. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Chairman, I would concur. I would also go on record opposing the gentleman from Texas amendment. I want to reiterate, as the gentlelady from California has said, that I will support her amendment tomorrow, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana rise?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise today in strong support of the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. There are so many reasons to support this amendment, an amendment whose time has come. This amendment will eliminate funding for all population control activities overseas. We have spent hour upon hour in this chamber debating the many issues surrounding foreign aid, which includes the funding for international family planning. There are many problems with the U.S. taxpayer spending nearly $400 million every year for international population control activities. One very obvious and practical problem that cannot be ignored is that the taxpayer simply cannot afford this type of program any longer. I wish I could count the number of times I have come to the floor to speak out in one way or another against excess federal spending and government intervention. And every time I implore members of this body to consider how we are sabotaging our children's futures, how we slowly but surely chip away at any prospects for a solid financial foundation every time we vote to spend more and more tax dollars on inappropriate and unconstitutional programs without any regard to the reality of our federal government's financial situation. But there is an even bigger problem that one simply associated with dollars. This problem is more fundamental to the appropriate role of the federal government as defined by the Constitution. Some might say that many provisions of this appropriations bill fall outside the guidelines given to us by the Constitution. And some might say the debate of that nature goes beyond the scope of this amendment. I think we should talk about the Constitution more. I think that every time we consider a bill, an amendment, a motion to instruct conferees, every time we take any legislative action, we should remember our oath to uphold the Constitution. This means that sometimes, even when things sound like a great idea or the perfect solution to a problem facing our constituents back home or faceless and nameless individuals suffering thousands of miles away, we have to show some restraint, if only because we are not empowered to act outside the legislative walls erected for us by our founding fathers. Furthermore, I believe that international population control funding isn't even a good idea. What concerns me greatly is that it appears that many of my colleagues have simply accepted the assertions of the population control lobby when they constantly and unfailingly contend that overpopulation is the cause of nearly all of the world's human suffering. For decades, we have heard doomsday predictions that the Earth's population is growing so much to the point that we will soon be unable to sustain this rate of growth. Make no mistake about it, and do not be misled. This is not an overcrowded planet. Too many people are not the problem. I would assert, however, that those more interested in redistributing wealth and power have everything to lose if the myth of an unsustainable population explosion is debunked. I would further contend that sound public policy based on real science, not misguided public and political maneuvers and schemes based on radical environmentalism, is the answer to the world's hunger and environmental problems. And flooding third world, developing, and developed countries with potentially harmful contraceptives and family planning information, while appearing to meet a very humanitarian need, is such a misguided policy. There have been numerous reports about the atrocities many women have suffered, all under the auspices of family planning. We have seen women in the slums of Bangladesh and Haiti who were part of experimentation with Norplant. We have heard accounts of women in Turkey who were told by volunteers that, quote, family planning, end quote, is more important than husbands, tradition, culture, or God, and that sterilization is better than children. Surely even those who advocate dollars for responsible population control policy would be alarmed at this information. And surely we should not force our constituents to contribute to these programs that undermine the cultures of our neighbors. I would simply conclude by expressing once again that we need to reevaluate our priorities, our financial situation, and most importantly, our constitutional obligations, and support this amendment. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The question occurs on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor of the amendment will say aye. Those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Texas.
I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to the order of the House of Thursday, July 24th, 1997, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas will be postponed.